Jim O'Hagan now has another educational tale for us. It's the story of a lady whose pioneering work still has influence to this day.
Walter, one September day about 3 years ago, as I was conducting a tour around the city cemetery, a person accompanying me drew my attention to a grave with the name Margaret Byers on the headstone. He wondered if she had been connected in the past to Belfast's Victoria College. I wasn't able to verify this for him at the time, but I'm glad he asked, for later research revealed a fascinating story of one of the 19th century's most remarkable Ulster women. She was born Margaret Morrow in Rathfriland, County Down, in April 1832, of farming stock, her father Andrew operating a flax mill as well. They were staunch Presbyterians, and Andrew was a temperance reformer who died in 1840 when Margaret was only 8 years of age. She, as often happened in those days, was sent to England, to Stoke-on-Trent, to live with two uncles. She attended a ladies' college in Nottingham, from which she in time became a teacher. The principal of this college, Margaret acknowledged in later years, left a deep impression on her, in that lady sincerely believed women were capable of anything if they put their minds to it. Margaret returned to the north of Ireland to marry at 19 a young clergyman, John Byers, whose family place was only 10 miles away from hers. The young minister was subsequently commissioned by the American Presbyterian Church to go to China as a missionary, so off he and his young wife went. Margaret's idea of a long life with John was cruelly shattered when, after only a short time in China, he developed what turned out to be an incurable disease, and the couple with their young son, also John, born in 1853, started out for home on one of the old sailing ships. However, the Reverend Byers died en route at New York and was buried there in Greenwood Cemetery. What adversity, Walter, but she had the character and the courage to overcome it. For in 1854 we find her starting a girls' secondary school in Cookstown and making the most of her professional status as a teacher. The venture was not successful for a number of reasons. The chief one, it seems, was that the upper classes in the town were unwilling, it is said, to give up the tradition of having private governesses for their daughters for whatever passed as suitable education, thus avoiding them mixing with families less well off than themselves. In any case, the secondary education of girls at the time was not a priority, especially girls of the upper and professional classes. It was felt with these girls that they would be married off to men able to keep them. They would have maids too from the lower orders who also did not need education. So why be out the expense on girls? Boys were different. The sons of wealthy parents were better catered for, often attending richly endowed secondary schools like the Royal Schools in Armagh or Belfast Inst. The curriculum of the girls' schools reflected this bias as well. This curriculum was very lightweight. It was designed more in terms of social etiquette rather than of solid learning. A girl could spend several years at one of the so-called ladies' seminaries and have, for instance, very little grounding in arithmetic or English grammar at the end of it. There was a showy superficiality about it. Mrs. Byers had different ideas, as she said later in life. My aim was to provide for girls, she said, an education adapted to their wants, as thorough as that which is affordable to boys in schools of the highest order, to work out for girls a practical and well-considered plan of education in which due regard should be given to the solid branches of learning as well as moral and religious training. In 1859 she moved to Belfast and was encouraged to open a school for young ladies by several of her Presbyterian friends, which she did at 13 Wellington Place. Belfast at the time was ripe for such an innovation, as the town was beginning its industrial expansion, and which made it in later years the fastest growing industrial centre in the British Isles. A new resident class of industrialists, manufacturers and professional men was coming into being, and these required their daughters to be educated. Mrs Byers' school catered for both boarders and day girls, and from the start she attempted to put her curriculum development ideas into practice. Thus the curriculum of her school consisted of elements of algebra, geometry, English grammar and arithmetic, modern history, natural science, subjects which were unthinkable usually in the small private schools for girls at the time. From the start, too, Mrs Byers imbued her schools and pupils with a strong religious ethos. She felt that if the pupils did not have this, then the rest of their education was as of nothing. The building of self-confidence and also character formation, and the serenity, as she said, to take each new day as a challenge, whatever ups and downs it might bring, were other features of the ethos of the new establishment. However much she admired and encouraged scholarship, she placed these latter qualities in the girls on a higher plane. After a few years and a further move to larger premises in Howard Street, the school, now called the Ladies' Collegiate, moved for the third time to Pakenham Place on the Dublin Road, and Mrs Byers lived in a house next door to the school. By 1873, Walter, the combined success and the headmistress's plans for curriculum expansion meant that even larger premises and not ordinary houses were needed, and so Mrs Byers decided to build a school at Lower Crescent, resulting in a move to that street in 1874. She borrowed £7,000 for this purpose, acquiring a site from the Corrie family, and the firm of Young and Mackenzie were the architects of the new buildings. So the school settled into premises which were to serve it for approximately 100 years, and Mrs Byers at last had the sort of purpose-built school which she felt her girls were entitled to if they were to achieve on an equal scale the sort of academic success already enjoyed by their brothers in schools such as RBAI and the Belfast Royal Academy. Just to go back a little, Walter, Queen's College Belfast was established in 1845 and in a short time became one of the constituent colleges of the Queen's University of Ireland. However, the Queen's University of Ireland had a men-only policy, both in allowing only men to attend lectures and be awarded degrees. In the early 1860s, a group of women, led by the redoubtable Miss Isabella Todd, formed the Ladies' Institute in Belfast. She was greatly aided by other women, such as Mrs Jane McIlwaine, wife of William McIlwaine, the rector of St George's in High Street, and by Margaret Byers. This pressure group was formed to force universities to admit women as students and allow them to graduate with degrees. As well, it sought greater employment opportunities for women. After a long, hard, arduous struggle, Walter, Queen's College allowed women to take its tests in 1870, but not degrees, the women being awarded certificates. This was Mrs Byers' opportunity, and she geared the top end of her school to entering for and passing these tests, which many pupils did with distinction. At last, in a real sort of way, women could be compared academically with men. But not everyone agreed that education was good for women's health. We have a story of the great poet Robert Browning, who told of the story of a friend of his whose young girl had developed a serious illness and she had lost all her teeth. And Robert Browning said, that's because she's doing too much studying, that she's lost all her teeth. Now, the setting up of the Royal University in 1879 greatly enhanced the status of women and education in Ireland, for now women could obtain degrees. The Royal University was a purely examining body with no constituent colleges. Students did not have to attend lectures, they simply sat its examinations. Certain schools had, Walter, an upper or third level tier in which the work done was of university undergraduate standard. Mrs Byers in 1881 set up her own collegiate department and took full advantage, as was typical of her, of the new situation. In the years that followed, down to the turn of the century, her Ladies' Collegiate, renamed Victoria College to celebrate the Diamond Jubilee of Queen Victoria, took many of the prizes, exhibitions and scholarships, and regularly was not only the leading female academy in Ireland in the prize lists, but also on occasion finished third overall behind the full university colleges of Belfast and University College Dublin. Also in these years, many of her girls took M.A.s from the Royal as well. The inauguration of the Intermediate Examination Board at about the same time as the Royal University gave Walter further impetus to the place of Mrs Byers for her school. Initially, again, these exams were to be for boys only, but due in great measure to herself, which included the lobbying of Parliament and her friendly relationship with J.P. Corrie, who was one of the commissioners of the Board of Intermediate Education and a local MP. In fact, he was called the patron saint of girls' education. The legislation was extended to enable girls to compete as well. So now we had an exam system at junior, middle and senior level which corresponded to the different ages of the pupils as they progressed through the secondary school. Of course, too, there was a prep department for younger sisters. Margaret's school benefited financially from this system with its strong emphasis on payment by results and scholarships. Schools were paid in proportion too for the number of entries they had for the various subjects. The system, despite its drawbacks, was very beneficial to her because she had no endowments of any kind. To illustrate, if a girl won a scholarship, and the fees in those days were approximately 16 guineas a year, it meant that the school got the money of the scholarship and also perhaps a younger sister in that family could be educated as well. So also from this time we see the setting down or the bedding down of the modern secondary school curriculum, which has lasted until relatively modern times. Although the system of payments by results was frowned on by many in education, there is no doubt that it was a godsend to Margaret. Now, what about the atmosphere in school under Mrs Byers? Well, she was a strict disciplinarian, but a fair one. Formidable might describe her best. Generally, girls who were summoned to appear before her seldom offended again. Every day, when she was the head in Lower Crescent, she sat on a desk and the pupils paraded before her. She was imbued with a strong Christian ethos and strove to impart this. For years she had endeavoured to have RE on the curriculum. For as I've said earlier, she believed that faith in God underpinned and overarched everything else in life. She also believed that Victoria girls, coming as they did generally from a privileged strata of society, had a duty to others less fortunate than themselves. She also believed in as wide a curriculum as possible, hence practical subjects were a vital part of her curriculum, being especially useful to the less able children. So she was already abreast of the times, a remarkable lady who championed women's role in society. About Belfast she was always recognisable in black, in her peculiar hat, often driven in her son's coach by his personal coachman. This son, John, was an eminent doctor, who, much to his mother's delight, was knighted in 1906 for his work in the old Belfast Hospital, by then the RVH. The health of the children, too, Walter, was of great concern to her. Having her son as the school doctor was a great help. But an outbreak of scarlatina in 1874 nearly finished the school. 5 girls took this illness. The boarders had to be evacuated and 1 girl died. But due to the loyalty of some of her parents and her own strength of character and sense of fortitude and prudent organisational skills, the crisis was overcome and the disaster of the school closing averted. Now, down the years, the school has had many distinguished pupils. None more so than Helen Waddell, who was born in Japan in 1889, where her father was a Christian missionary. Helen came back to Ireland at an early age and lived in Belfast during her years at Victoria. Her niece, Miss Molly Martin, who you had on the programme a few weeks ago, and who's still hale and hearty, lives in County Down near where Helen, who died in 1965, is buried. Molly told me that Helen and her sister walked to school from Cedar Avenue on the Antrim Road each day and back. Helen carried all before her and was a distinguished scholar of Queen's University. She was a lecturer in Cambridge and a very eminent writer whose book, The Wandering Scholars, on medieval Latin scholarship gained international acclaim. She never forgot Victoria and often returned on prize days, remembering Miss Mateer, the vice principal, with great affection. Now, Margaret, being a woman of such organisational ability, I suppose it's natural for her that she paid particular attention to her choice of teachers for the school. She tried where possible to employ ex-students of Victoria, who all had to be certificated. She was a great believer too in the Froebel system of education, especially for the kindergarten years. Outside interests played a large part in her life, especially in relation to the Temperance Association and in her efforts to improve the lot of destitute children. She was prominent in the Ulster Women's Temperance Association, being a total abstainer herself. One of her mentors in this area of social work was the Reverend John Edgar, sometime minister of Alfred Street Presbyterian Church, who one day startled passers-by, it is said, by pouring a gallon of whiskey through the window of his manse into the gutter. The Prison Gate Mission, where genteel ladies invited ex-prisoner women upon release to a cup of tea in a pleasant house, was another innovation of Margaret's. Eventually, she was instrumental in having a house, Tudor Lodge on the Crumlin Road, purchased for this purpose. Destitute children, as I've said, were close to her heart, and in her time, and due greatly to her influence, houses in Alfred Street, Shamrock Lodge on the Ravenhill Road, and spacious accommodation at Leganeel were purchased, largely from public collections and subscriptions. Eventually, this whole project, involving a number of premises, became known as the Victoria Homes. They were run as industrial schools, the children doing a lot of the realistic everyday work, whilst getting a basic education as well, and the Victoria girls would be very much involved in these too. She was in politics a prominent unionist. In 1906, having owned Victoria College since 1859, she was made an LLD from Trinity College, Dublin, the first Northern woman to be so honoured. and she died in 1912, one of the best known and most influential women, or indeed persons, in the province of Ulster. She ran the school personally, well past retirement age. After her death, her son John turned the school into a cooperative venture involving the remaining teachers, and later a board of governors was formed. Down the years it has grown from strength to strength and remains one of the most prominent in Ireland. In 1972, the connection with Lower Crescent was finally severed when the school moved completely to very modern premises at Cranmore Malone. In the 1980s, it was amalgamated with Richmond Lodge. The school's motto, "Honour is the reward of loyalty," fits well, I feel, with the sentiments of the founder. And the school itself today is rightly proud of its champion, Mrs Margaret Byers. Her inspiration, Walter, is very much seen in the words of the school anthem, and I would like to quote them for you. "Father, we ask that you will bless our school, where we learn lessons of faith and of truth. Help us all to use our talents to the full, and to bless those who teach us and mould our youth. Grant us the grace to learn within these walls all we need to fit us for future years. Guide us as we work, that when duty on us calls, we will meet life's challenge and never fear. Always be with us as we work and play. Make us caring, friendly, good and kind, thinking first of others each and every day, as we follow your way, Lord, in heart and mind."
Jim O'Hagan and the story of Margaret Byers. Well, for the remainder of the programme, it's music all the way, and it's music with a strong holiday theme. Roy Irvine's here.